If you will, turn with me to Exodus chapter 15 this morning. We are picking up steam in Exodus. There's going to be some weeks where we start to just look at entire chapters at a time. But today we're just going to look at 5 verses. Exodus chapter 15, we're picking up in verse 22. Thus far, what we've seen in Exodus has been one overarching theme. Moses asked at the burning bush, "Who shall I say sent me? Who are you?" Pharaoh asked the question, "Who is this Lord? I don't know him." And that question has been answered through a series of plagues, through the Passover, through the pillars, through the parting of the Red Sea. Israel and Egypt and the nations around them have learned exactly who the Lord is. He is the great I am. And now, standing on the other side of the sea, having been delivered by God and having watched the waters swallow up their enemies, a new question, a rhetorical question, but an appropriate question, is being asked in joyous, exuberant worship. Who is like you, O Lord? And of course the answer is assumed. There's none like you. God is altogether different. He is transcendent. He is holy. This is the God who has made himself known to his people. And at this point in Exodus, we start to see a transition in the book. And it's moving towards another, much more practical theme. How are God's people to live in light of the God who has revealed himself? Yes, the book is still about God, and the theme will continue throughout the rest of the book. But as we've also said, this book is a picture of the testimony of every believer. And now that we have been redeemed by the work of the Passover lamb, and now that we have passed through the waters, through the veil, and came into the knowledge and the presence of a holy God, how are we to live our lives? In those first days of salvation, it's very easy to stand there looking over our former life and sing songs of praise as they did on the other side of the Red Sea. The salvation is fresh and it's real to us, and we respond appropriately through praise. We saw that in the first 21 verses of chapter 15. But we can't stay right there forever. We are I can't say that word this morning. We are we're moving, Corey. We're moving through through the wilderness towards the promised land. And in order to get there, we have to pass through this mess of the world that we live in, this wilderness, this strange land that is not our home, a land where we are strangers and aliens and sojourners, a land that is full of difficulty and trials and sorrows and uncertainty. So how do we respond to God while we live in this wilderness land? This is what we can learn from Israel through the rest of Exodus. There are things that we need to avoid. There are things that we need to pursue. And there are things that we need to hope for. So picking up in verse 22, Moses writes, chapter 15, verse 22, "Then Moses made Israel set out from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days into the wilderness and found no water. And they came to Marah. They came not to drink the water of Marah, but because it was bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, 'What shall we drink?' And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made for them a statute and a rule. And there he tested them, saying, 'If you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer.' Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees. and they encamped there by the water. The first thing I want us to see this morning that we can learn from Israel is something that we should avoid, and that is the grumbling in the wilderness. You see in verse 22, Moses made them set out. He made Israel set out. So that passage could literally be translated as Moses caused Israel to set out, which implies to us they didn't want to leave the Red Sea. They were reluctant about going forward. And ultimately, we know, though, that this was not Moses making them leave. This was the Lord compelling them to lead. That pillar of cloud and pillar of fire was going to stay with them their entire time in the wilderness. And when it moved, they moved. So God is saying, all right, you've witnessed my glory. I've revealed myself to you. You're safe. You're redeemed. You're delivered. Now it's time to move forward into the wilderness. This is the northern part of the Sinai Peninsula. And this was not a habitable environment. There were 1 million+ people traveling through the wilderness, and it was a desert, and there were limited resources, and there was limited water, and they're just wandering along, following the pillar, not knowing where they're going. So naturally, they start to grumble. You think of all the things that they had witnessed over the past months. All the various plagues, the signs, the wonders, the miracles. They had seen all of that day after day, week after week. And then when they come out of Egypt and God leads them out of slavery, they're making a break for it, and all hope seems to be lost as they're now trapped between the sea and the army. And God does this unthinkable thing when the sea opens up and there's a wall on the left and a wall on the right, and he leads them through on dry land, and he sees the enemy chasing after them, and he pours the water back over, swallowing them up. They get to witness all of this firsthand. This great God, Yahweh, has made himself known through plagues and through the crossing, and they've seen all of it. And now they journey 3 days. 3 days is all that it takes for the praise and the worship to turn into grumbling and complaining. They want something to drink. That's fair. That's understandable. They're in a desert. They don't have their hydro flask or their circles or whatever. They've taken all their water. They've given it to their children. They've given it to their animals. They're desperate. They're hot. They don't know where they're going. And they complain. And there's the problem. They ask for water with a spirit of complaining. It's not a problem. We've talked about this in Habakkuk. We talked about this in Lamentations. It's not a problem. It's not inappropriate for us to bring our problems to God. It's not even inappropriate to complain to God as long as we're doing it with the right spirit. We're called to cast all of our cares upon Him. But the sin occurs when we start to bring our complaints with an attitude of entitlement and defiance, and we're shaking our fist instead of standing there by faith with an open hand. If we look at Israel now, 3 days into the wilderness, we like to point fingers at Israel through the book of Exodus and Numbers. How dare them? They should know better. I would never do that. But if we're really honest with ourselves, we should be able to look at Israel and say, I'm surprised they made it 3 days. Because I wouldn't have made it 3 hours. I'm going to need a Pepsi at some point, Moses. That's all that it takes for them to falter so very quickly. They go from praise to grumbling. And when you think about the Israelites, why would they do this? If you think about who they were and where they came from, they had spent their entire life in slavery in Egypt. It was the only reality that they had ever known. It was all that they ever understood. In Egypt, they knew who they were. They knew where they were. They knew where they were going. They knew what was expected of them. They knew what tomorrow held. In Egypt, everything was operating by sight. I can see it and I can touch it, so I'm going to do it. In Egypt, everything was predictable, and predictability is comfortable, and comfortable is safe. So now that they've moved out of Egypt, where everything is tangible, they're moving to a place where they don't know who they are. They don't know where they're going. They don't know what's expected of them. They don't know what to do. They have been moved into a position where they have to operate solely by faith. And that is difficult because even though they've been brought out of Egypt, there's still a whole lot of Egypt in their hearts. And this is a new way of living for them. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know why they were going. All that they were told was just follow. And if you've been in that experience where you're facing difficulty and you don't know the outcome, it makes it much harder to be faithful, to persist, and to carry on. Now, if you've ever been in the hospital delivering a baby, I don't know firsthand, but I've been told it's quite painful. My only job was to hold the leg, so I don't know, but I can imagine that it's a very painful experience. But you know why you're there. You know what that pain is about. You know what that pain is producing. You know where it's all headed. It's much different than if you're going to the hospital to get the test results of some sickness or some disease. It's much more difficult to go to the doctor because there's chest pains or because there's something uncertain happening. It gets much scarier then. They didn't know what was happening, and they didn't trust the one who was leading them, so they grumbled. That's going to be a reoccurring theme, grumbling. And their grumbling, if you notice in the book of Exodus, is never directed against the Lord. But we can't be fooled by that. Maybe they were just too brave, or they weren't brave enough. Maybe they were too spiritual. But they always direct their complaints elsewhere. Just like us, there's always a dog to kick. We may not complain directly to God, but we'll complain to our leaders and to our spouses and to our families and to our friends and to any authority that's over us. We'll direct our complaints to them, but not to the Lord. If you have children, you know this. Some of our parents are younger and they haven't experienced this yet. So let me just tell you, there is a point in the life of your children where this amazing evolution happens. When they turn 13, supernaturally, parents become dumb. Like flipping a switch overnight, children get smarter and parents get infinitely dumber. And with that goes all the trust. When you're 5 or 8 or 10 and you give a child instruction, they may not know why. They may not agree with why. They may not understand what's happening. But at the end of the day, well, mom and dad, okay, I trust them, I get it, I'll follow them. But when they turn 13 and you give basic instructions, what? That's dumb. Why would I believe you? Why would I follow you? Why would I trust you? I'm smarter than you. And when you don't trust the person, that's when grumbling enters into the scene. It's one thing to do something very difficult when you're following someone that you have absolute trust in. You know, I may not know what they're doing, but I trust that they know best, so I'm going to follow them. And you do it, and it might hurt, it may not be easy, but when you do it, it might work out for you in the end. But when you lose that trust, all the grumbling starts to unfold. Why? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing it that way? Why do I have to do it? That's dumb. I don't like that. And we see there why this sin is so very serious. When Israel starts to grumble, no matter whether they're directing it at one another or whether they're directing it at Moses or Aaron or Pharaoh, when we start to grumble and we point the finger at our government or our spouse or our children or our church or our pastor, when we do that, we're ultimately grumbling about God, a sovereign God. And we're looking at him and saying, God, you can't be trusted. God, you don't do all things well. God, you don't know what you're doing. You haven't thought this through. My way's better. Your way doesn't make sense. It's dumb. I don't trust you, so I can't follow you. Israel didn't know where they were. They didn't know why they were there. They didn't know where they were going, and they didn't trust Moses, who was leading them. They didn't like their circumstances, so they grumble. There's 1 million people in the desert with limited resources, and in 3 days, between the animals and the people, they run out of water, and they were thirsty, and they are desperately thirsty, and they come upon a spring. Many of us have had that experience when you come upon a cave spring, and you get to scoop in that nice, clear, cold water. It hits different, doesn't it? It's soothing. It tastes different. It's lovely. So they come upon this spring, and you imagine you're in the desert, and you come upon it, and you see it, and you're full of hope, and you run towards it, and you fall to your knees, and you scoop it up, and blech. It's bitter. It's described as brackish, which means it has a mineral taste. Brackish literally means salt water times 10. It's undrinkable. It's impotable. They can't handle it. Have you ever drank that out of a cave spring? I remember going to Brunswick, Georgia on a mission trip, and we got into town. It's a town full of paper mills, and it smelled awful when we drove into town. And we get to where we're staying, and we start to settle in, and we roll out our sleeping bags in the classrooms and whatever, and we shower, and we drink, and we brush our teeth, and we realize this water tastes like sulfur. And then over a period of days, you just watch the entire mission team dropping like flies. We're just getting sick off of this awful, bitter water. This is where Israel's at. We can't drink it. And all of their hopes are being dashed. All of this anticipation. Salvation is there before us. We're going to survive. There's water. We can press on. Is out the window. So they grumble. Obviously, we don't ever complain when things are going right. But when we face hardship, when we face adversity, that's when we groan. And groaning is one thing, but grumbling is another altogether. The Bible's full of groanings. Romans chapter 8, we groan along with creation. A groan says to God, this is really hard. But a grumble says, God, you're really hard. A groan says, Lord, I would like something different if you could change my circumstances. But a grumble says, God, I wish you were someone different because I don't like what you're doing. There are a lot of groans in the Bible. But unfortunately, there are many more grumbles. And those grumbles are sinful. I think I can say with confidence that this is a sin that many of us are guilty of. I'm guilty of this. Grumbling is a sin that we typically dislike. We could even go further and say always, universally, we dislike it in other people, but we're quick to accept it and justify it in ourselves. It's so easy to spot. You see that person and you just avoid that person. They're so negative. They're grumbling. They're complaining all the time. I don't like that. I don't want to be around them. No one ever comes up to you and says, hey, I want to introduce you to my new friend. She's such a wonderful person. She complains all the time, grumbles, and that's just every word out of her mouth. We don't see that. No one likes that. But we're quick to see it in others, but not in ourselves. We see it in our kids, right? If you've ever vacationed with a child, you've seen this grumbling. You go and you spend a week doing all these amazing things. You go to Disney World, you go to the beach, you go to the park, you travel the country. You just invest in these children, giving them this amazing experience. And the whole time, what is it? I'm bored. This is dumb. Why are we doing this? I don't like this. I just want to go home. What's the Wi-Fi password? Oh, my service is out. And you're driving and you're just saying, just hush your face. We're trying to make memories here. And you get back home and you're just exhausted and tired of one another. And you look back and you say, why did we do that to ourselves? No one even said thank you. It was just grumbling the whole time. When we grumble, one pastor said, we grumble when neither the past provision nor the future promises have any bearing on the present pain. The wilderness that we all exist in makes us forget God's graces. And we've forgotten everything that the Lord has done for us. We forget our testimony. We forget our salvation. We forget all the blessings that He's bestowed upon us. And when we get into that mindset of forgetfulness, it causes us also to neglect the future promises that He will be with us, that He will never leave us or forsake us, that there is an inheritance waiting for us. We forget the past, and we ignore the future, and we focus solely upon the present pain, and we grumble. While we're traveling through this wilderness, the Lord is telling us right here what He expects of us. How are we going to live in light of the God who's revealed Himself? He wants you to remember the history of grace in your life. He wants you to believe the promises of the future. If we do that, it's not going to eliminate all the groaning, but it will certainly temper some of the grumbling. It puts everything into perspective. Look what God has done for me, so maybe I hush. Look what God has promised me, so maybe I just be still and silent. I want you to notice that, and I also want you to see how the Lord responds to their grumbling in verse 25. And he cried to the Lord. Moses cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. Moses cries out in faith, and accomplishing, in just a few short words, he accomplishes more than Israel accomplished with all their groanings and grumblings. And he doesn't respond to Moses in a callous way, in an angry way, not with exasperation. He doesn't yell to the kids in the back seat, just be quiet and say thank you. He responds to them, to all their grumblings, with grace. Moses, there's a log. He shows him a log. I want you to throw the log into the water, and then the water becomes sweet. Now, there are two mistakes that are commonly made there, and we can make either one of them. One is to make that log hyper-spiritual. A lot of people like to look at that and say, you know, there's a tree, it's thrown into the bitter waters. That tree represents the cross. The cross makes bitter waters sweet. It's tempting, but I think that's a stretch. It's probably not the right way to look at it. The other is to look at it from some sort of naturalistic way. You know, what kind of wood was that? Did it change the taste of the water? Was that a nice hickory? Maybe a cherry? So we got some smoked water now? What is that? We shouldn't make either of those mistakes. We should just acknowledge this is a supernatural experience and see the point of what's happening. The point is in one word in verse 25. And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log. That word showed in the English translation is the same root word as the word Torah. Torah means God's law, His teaching, His instruction. So God is instructing Moses on where to find this particular log, and He is instructing him what to do with it. And as Moses hears the word of the Lord and obeys the word of the Lord, the water is made sweet. And I think this is kind of a parable, an object lesson for us. That God is pointing His people to something. He's saying, my law and my teaching, obedience to that makes life sweet. That's our second point, testing in the wilderness. What did God have for them in the wilderness? Why were they there? Why not just snap the fingers and transport them from Egypt to the Canaan? He wanted to teach them something, and it's a lesson that's going to come through testing them. Verse 26. Let's back up to the second half of verse 25. There the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them, saying, if you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer. Now let's not misunderstand this test, because there's an if in there. If you do this, I'll do this. We can take a test like this, and we can assume that he's now making salvation conditional. This is not a requirement for salvation. He's not taking away this awesome truth that salvation is a free gift of God's grace. Israel didn't deserve deliverance. They didn't deserve to be brought through the sea. They didn't deserve the promised land. They didn't deserve to know the great I am. That's all grace. So this is not a requirement for salvation. This test, this if, is a requirement for people who are already saved. If we remember who they are, they're on the other side of the Red Sea. The Lord did not lead them to the banks of the Red Sea. He did not put the army behind them and say to them, listen, I see the Egyptians there before you, and I'm going to keep them at bay, but I want you to stay right here beside the sea for 40 years. And if you keep my rules for 40 years, then I'm going to part the waters and I'm going to lead you through it and you're going to be set free. That's not what he said. By grace, this was a one-sided salvation. And he's now looking at these people that he saved on the other side of the sea, and he's saying to them, here's what I want you to do. Here's my law. Here's my commandment for you, the saved. This was about sanctification. This was not about justification. He's looking at them and saying, Israel, I love you. You are my people. I have saved you. I have bought you with a price, and I did it for a purpose. Now, Israel, now, my beloved children, now, church, we can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way. Israel began a history for themselves of preferring to do things the hard way. But we can learn from this because many of us have followed their path. You see the promise at the end of verse 26, and we don't misunderstand it. This is not a promise for universal ease and prosperity and health, because no one among the Israelites would have expected that. He's not saying you're never going to get sick and you're never going to die. He's saying, if you do this, if you hear me and if you obey me, I'll never give you the plagues that I gave Egypt. He's not promising them that nothing bad will ever happen, that no one will ever get sick. But he's saying, look, you are my people. But don't think that you aren't sinners like the Egyptians. You know how to sin just as well as they do. And I love you, and I saved you, and I redeemed you. But here's the test. I want you to listen to me. I want you to do what I say. And I want you to walk with me by faith. I want you to walk in repentance. I want you to walk in obedience. I want you to worship me. That's why I saved you. And if you do that, he says, things are going to go well for you. If you were in our Shepherding a Child's Heart class, what he's saying there is, if you stay in the circle, everything's going to work out for you. If you stay obedient, you're going to be blessed. It's not going to be without suffering, but things are going to go better for you when you do them my way. Or, he says, we can do this the hard way. We can do this the Egyptian way. And I'll send the plagues on you. And this bitter water, that's just a reminder of the water that was turned to blood. I can leave it hard. But either way, whether it's the easy way, the hard way, whether it's in faith and obedience, or whether it's in stubbornness and a hardened heart, my will be done. So he's saying, do you want the great I am, or do you want the God that crushed the Egyptians? What do you want to do, Israel? Progress in the Christian life, and a good deal of its happiness and its blessedness, is conditional upon our faithfulness and our obedience. I know we don't like that because it makes it seem like, well, now it's based upon works. But the blessed life, the life that is led by green pastures and quiet waters, the life that finds the oasis in the wilderness, is an obedient life. Jesus said in John chapter 14, verse 21, "Whoever has my commandments and keeps them, he is it who loves me. And who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and manifest myself to him." He goes on in John chapter 15, verse 19 through 11. "As the Father has loved me, so I love you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you and your joy may be full." Obedience, Jesus is saying, leads to an experience of the love of the Father, or being loved by the Father and the Son, who come to us with a new depth and a new intimacy, and they manifest themselves to us, and we get to see and know this is the God of the Bible. And obedience to him, Jesus says, leads to abiding in Christ and having the fullness of joy. Or to put it simply, obedience makes this bitter life sweet. He's teaching them that just because you're free doesn't mean you're free to sin. Liberty is not a license to sin. Salvation does not mean you get to keep being a slave to sin. The Israelites needed to realize that God was not their personal genie. It would have been easy for them to look and say, listen, we've got Yahweh on our side, and he's with us, and if we get into a jam, he can send a plague, he can send a pillar, he can part some waters, he can stop the river, he can keep the sun in the sky. He can do all these different things. He's going to care for us, and he's going to make our life easy. They needed to learn that that's not what it's like to follow God in the wilderness. God being for you does not mean that he is for your sin, or that he is even indifferent towards your sin. Sometimes we think, well, if God is really for me, then he's just going to look past the things that I do. But that's not it. If you're his adopted child, he is infinitely and always for you. And since he is for you, he will not be indifferent towards the things that are endangering you. The Israelites were tempted to make that mistake. We're tempted to make that mistake. They wanted to go straight into Canaan, from grace to glory, but there were no shortcuts. They had to go through the wilderness, just like all of us. We have to travel through the wilderness. And if we're going to make it to the promised land, we have to endure this journey that we're on, where we need to be obedient to his word, and we need to be dependent upon his grace, and we need to be faithful to follow him. That's the lesson. That's the first thing he wants to teach them. 3 days out, and they're learning, you need my grace, you need to be obedient, and you need to walk by faith. He's going to need to teach it to them over and over again. So that question becomes, for us, for them, they're singing beside the Red Sea. Will you keep singing in the wilderness when the test comes? It's one thing to sing on the banks of the sea. The Lord has thrown his horse and his rider into the sea. He has triumphed gloriously over his enemies, they sang. That's a great song. But can you sing it when you're thirsty? When you're hungry? When you're being oppressed? When you're being persecuted? When you're alone? When can you sing when the wilderness seems to be consuming you? Makes us think of Psalm 137. How, excuse me, how shall we sing the songs of Zion in a strange land? As they are captives in Babylon, they're singing or asking this question, can we sing? And it's hard. We're strangers, we're aliens, we're exiles in this world. This is not your home. So people are going to think you're weird. It's good to be weird. People are going to think you're strange. They're going to think all kinds of awful things about you. How do you keep singing the song of triumph when you're in a season of testing? The test is really quite simple. He gives us 4 verbs. Listen, do, give ear, and keep. That reminds us of Exodus chapter 2, where the Lord gives those verbs when the people are crying out. And it says he remembered, he saw, he heard, and he knew. So now we have this connection. God is saying, when you needed me and all hope was lost, I remembered you, I saw you, I heard you, and I knew you. And now he's saying, because you know me, I've saved you, you're my people, so I want you to listen to me, I want you to remember me, I want you to hear me, and I want you to know me intimately. But he doesn't leave them there beside those waters. Look at our third point real quick. We're coming to Elim. This journey through the wilderness is not a journey from point A to point B. We need to get that. There's an aha moment that just goes off in my head, right? When you're driving on the road, it's point A to point B, right? Everyone else is just in the way because it seems like they're on a journey. I'm just trying to get somewhere, right? Well, our life is not just point A to point B. This is a sanctifying journey through which we are being refined and being prepared for point B. Our faith is being grown as we're being taught how much we should be dependent upon the grace of God. We're being taught that if we persist through this wilderness, we'll reach the promised land in a better state than we left Egypt. We're being taught that if we're journeying, oh, there it is again. As we're moving through this wilderness, we're being sanctified, made holy, so that we're a people who have a hope of reaching not just a destination, but an attitude where we can rest in grace even while we're in this wilderness. Mara it's the word for bitter. The water was bitter. And God was gracious to the people there. Gracious to a people who didn't deserve it, who grumbled against him and grumbled against his servant Moses. But yet he only turns the water from bitter to sweet. But he then leads them from a place called Mara to Elim. Elim has come to mean a place of rest, a place of healing, a place of plenty, and a place of prosperity. Notice what they find there in verse 27. When they came to Elim, there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the water. Now this is the inspired word of God. Moses was not just counting on his, I see 12 springs, or I see 70 trees. I'm going to write this down. That's good information if we ever have to find this again. That's not what Moses was doing. This is very intentional. I don't want us to read too much into the numbers, but the numbers are very intentional. There are 12 tribes of Israel. There are 70 elders of Israel. There's a spring for each of the tribes and a tree for each of the elders, he says. And what we're learning there is a testimony of God's absolute provision for his people. What we're seeing here is that God's grace matches the needs of God's people. God is gracious to give them exactly what they need when they need it most. God is gracious in the lives of every believer as we live in this wilderness, as we're moving through it, as we're going towards the promised land, God is gracious to send both seasons of prosperity and of adversity. There are times when God in His grace sends Mara to us because we need to be humbled. We're high on our horse, we're on the mountaintop, and we're thinking a lot of ourselves, and we're boasting, and we're arrogant, so God sends bitterness into our life to bring us back down to the appropriate level. And after a time of Mara, then He brings us into Elam. We need both. Mara sanctifies us. It keeps us humble. But Elam sustains us. And I'm not sure how you feel, but I can say with certainty that there are times where you just feel like, man, it's always Mara. It's always bitterness. I'm just trapped in Mara. You just feel like I've been in the wilderness for a really long time. John Knox, my favorite reformer, one of my favorite quotes of his seems to be much more applicable every day as we go on. He says, just as the world is growing weary of me, I'm growing weary of it. The wilderness is getting old, and we're longing for Canaan. So along the way, there's going to be times where God doesn't give us Canaan, but He gives us Elam. He gives us a place of rest, a place of healing, a place to be restored so that we can continue on in the wilderness. When your life is Mara, don't forget God, because God has not forgotten you. Do you believe that Elam comes after Mara? Then you press on and you persist. It's hopelessness that makes us feel as if our suffering is just growing worse and worse and worse. Suffering hurts. Pain hurts. And it's when you expect life to be a tiptoe through the tulips and you don't have any hope any longer, that's when the bitterness of Mara becomes almost unbearable. But we're not meant to be a hopeless people. We're not meant to be a broken, bitter people. God promised you that there would be suffering. That's a given. But He wants us not to grieve as those who have no hope, but for those who have hope in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Do you believe that God makes things better? Do you believe that God has better things in store for you? What we see in the rest of the Bible is that there is something much more important than water for us. Even more important than the relief from the bitter waters of Mara. But it is respite, it is rest, it is healing from the bitterness of our sins. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 15 says, "See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled." There's the danger. Not just the water, but life, soul, and spirit that has been made bitter. You can become so embittered that you say at Mara, this is it. Nothing. We're not getting any better. This is everything. We're not moving from here. My life is Mara. Woe is me. I'll just lay here and die. Because you're bitter with someone. You're bitter with a spouse or a friend or a parent or a child or a church member or just with yourself or with God. And you are just in this gall of bitterness. So you start to fall deeper and deeper into sin. But look at Israel. At least Israel knows they're thirsty. There are a whole lot of people in the world who are dying of thirst and don't even know it. We are all, in one degree or another, at some point in our life, going to toil with Mara. We're going to deal with the bitterness. But we should be looking for Elam. Even on the best days, we think there must be sweeter waters somewhere. There must be more blessings and more favor and more joy. God wired you to look for and long for Elam, for Canaan. He didn't design you to be satisfied by the bitterness, but to long for the hope and the rest of Elam. So the question is, will you come to Elam? Will you come for the first time? Maybe you've never trusted Christ. Or will you come for the 100th time, having followed him, and you continually to come back? Like the woman on the well, at the well. You just come for that water that satisfies your soul so that you'll never thirst again. Think of all the times in the Bible that God beckons you to come. And you don't have to be thirsty. Isaiah 55:11, 55:1. Come, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and he who has no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk. Come without money and without price. Come, the Bible says. What does John say in John 7:37? If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Will you come to the well? That's the call of God. This God who has revealed himself to us has said, come and be satisfied with Jesus Christ. He is enough for you. And that's what this test is. Is Christ enough? Come to the water, as Isaiah said. Come to me and drink, as Jesus says. And you know what you'll find? Finally, in the very last chapter of the Bible, in Revelation 22, if we come to Christ, if we move past Mara to Elam, and we rest in our resurrected Lord, what will we find? And let the one who is thirsty come. Let the one who desires take the water of life without price. Come. You don't have to live in this bitterness. You have to exist in this wilderness, but you don't have to live in the bitterness. You can come out of Egypt to Elam, where you can drink on the glory and the beauty of Christ Jesus, who makes the bitter things sweet. This is why we come to the table today. I want to ask our deacons to come. We come to this table to remember exactly what Jesus Christ did. I want to read